Have you ever felt that? That quiet, unspoken fracture running through our sense of reality, that
Mm.
feeling that we're just, isolated minds in maybe a cold, meaningless universe.
Yeah.
And science and religion, they just seem perpetually at war, pulling us apart.
It's like looking into a fractured mirror, like you said. It's a feeling our sources actually describe. They call it a sickness in the modern soul.
A sickness in the modern soul, wow.
And today, we're really diving deep into this whole nature of uncertainty and meaning. We've got an incredible stack of sources here: cutting edge quantum physics, ancient Taoist philosophy, neuroscience, even climate science, and process metaphysics.
That's quite a mix. So
Mm.
our mission for this deep dive then is to challenge that deep-seated idea of a fixed reality, right?
Exactly. We want to explore the surprising idea that, well, that what we traditionally call God might not be some separate designer out there,
But what then?
but maybe the very pattern of the universe itself. A pattern revealing itself not in stillness, but through, chaos, contradiction, and the sheer courage it takes to truly perceive without grasping.
Okay, so the goal is to offer maybe a shortcut to understanding that uncertainty isn't this terrible curse.
But actually a sacred path. That's the
It's a
idea.
sacred path. I like that. Okay, let's get into it.
So the sources, they start with this powerful observation you mentioned, the sickness in the modern soul.
Yeah.
This perception of ourselves as like isolated minds rattling around in a dead machine universe, totally void of meaning.
And they argue science has been misused, right? Miscast as a blade to sever spirit from matter.
Exactly. When it should be a tool for unveiling nature's rhythms. And religion, on the other hand, has often calcified into dogma. It's become afraid of the very unknown it once held sacred.
It's a pretty stark picture they paint.
It is, but what's really fascinating is their central idea. Reality just doesn't obey these neat borders we've drawn. They suggest that beneath all the forms, beneath consciousness, beneath even the apparent chaos, something deeper flows.
Something flows. What kind of something?
Well, it's not a being, not a fixed law, not even a mind like ours. It's described as a pattern, a rhythm of collapse and emergence, of hidden order behind apparent disorder.
A pattern.
A rhythm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this underlying flow, that's what our sources connect to the Tao, to the quantum field, and I love this phrase, the face of God glimpsed only when everything else falls apart.
Wow. Okay, that's deep. And quantum mechanics fits in here, how? Because that seems like a big leap from philosophy.
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, as you said. Quantum mechanics, or our sources explain, it completely shattered our last illusions of certainty about the physical world.
How so?
At the subatomic level, matter isn't solid or fixed. It's probabilistic. It's like a haze of potential until observed.
A haze of potential. Think of an electron. It isn't a tiny ball bearing. It's more like a probability cloud, a wave function, existing sort of everywhere and nowhere at once. Feynman and his colleagues pointed this out way back in '65. The electron is here and there and nowhere until you look.
Until you look, so our looking changes it.
Fundamentally, it demonstrates that consciousness isn't just a passive bystander. It's somehow entangled with the fabric of the real. We're active participants.
We're part of the process.
Exactly. And this modern physics idea, it echoes ancient wisdom in this really profound way. Alan Watts, back in '66, he said, "To define is to confine. You are what the whole universe is doing, in the same way a wave is what the ocean is doing."
That's beautiful. It sounds a lot like Lao Tzu.
It's a perfect parallel. Tao Te Ching, chapter 42. All things carry yin and embrace yang. They achieve harmony by blending with the vital breath.
So what we call being is just temporary.
A temporary crystallization, a brief fold in this endless flow, and God, in this view, isn't static. It's the eternal unfolding movement itself.
Okay, so pulling these threads together, if particles are just potential until we look, if reality isn't solid stuff, what is the universe made of?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And our sources propose something radical. Maybe it's not made of static matter at all,
But of
of meaning. The underlying pattern itself forms the universe's true fabric.
meaning. Wow, so their core thesis
The
is
universe is not made of matter. It is made of meaning. And what we call God is not the designer of the pattern, but the pattern itself, a sacred intelligence that reveals itself through collapse, contradiction, and the courage to perceive without grasping.
perceive without grasping. That's key.
It is, and the conclusion is pretty mind-bending. Our salvation, maybe, lies in surrendering to the truth that uncertainty is holy.
Uncertainty holy. That's a complete turnaround from wanting certainty. A huge shift.
Let's dive deeper into this quantum level then, because it really does flip our understanding of reality on its head.
Okay.
Our sources describe it like this. Reality, when undisturbed, is a ghost.
A ghost.
Seriously. Particles literally flicker in and out of mathematical states. Not here, not there, but both. They do not become something until you look. This isn't just philosophy, it's hard physics proven again and again.
And the classic demonstration is the double slit experiment, right?
Exactly. You shoot particles, like electrons, at a screen with two slits. If you don't watch which slit they go through, they act like waves, they interfere with each other, creating a pattern on the detector behind the slits.
Like ripples in water.
Precisely. But the moment you put a detector at the slits to see which one the particle goes through, poof, the wave pattern disappears, the particle acts like a particle again, going through one slit or the other. The wave collapses just because we looked.
So our looking forces it to choose.
It seems that way. This wave function collapse strongly suggests consciousness is an active participant, like Feynman said. We're co-authors of its becoming.
Co-authors of reality. That's huge.
Feynman himself said, nature herself does not know which of these possibilities is true until the moment it is observed. It's genuinely mind-bending. Our attention shapes the world.
And you said this mirrors ancient Taoism.
Remarkably so. The Taoists understood the universe as fundamentally flow, not static stuff, and it cannot be known, only joined.
Only joined.
Think of Lao Tzu's famous first line. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The act of naming, of defining, it collapses the potential. It kills the field of becoming.
So to exist is something specific. Is a collapse.
Yes, it's a kind of first death, the death of infinite possibility, but it's also the first act of creation. Manifestation is collapse.
And this applies to us too, not just electrons.
Our sources suggest exactly that. You too are a waveform. Before language, before identity, we were maybe pure becoming, until observed, named, defined, and collapsed into a self.
Wow. So the self isn't a thing, it's an event.
It's more like a process. Alan Watts again. The self is a verb. Something the universe is doing in the same way a wave is something the ocean is doing. There's no truly separate observer, just awareness participating in form. The self is a pattern, constantly folding and unfolding through time.
If observation shapes reality, then our attention matters. A lot.
That leads to what our sources call a profound quantum ethics. If observation creates reality, then attention is sacred.
Sacred attention.
To look is to change, to name is to birth, or maybe sometimes to kill potential. Perception becomes power. And the crucial question isn't what is true, but how should I observe?
That puts a lot of responsibility on us.
It does, and it challenges modern theology's frequent promise of certainty, of fixed answers.
Right.
But quantum physics and mysticism, they seem to agree here. Ultimate truth is veiled, it's unfolding. To live at the Tao or navigate the quantum world is not to know, it is to trust.
Trust the process.
Trust the process. To act without grasping, to love without control. Lao Tzu said, knowing not knowing is true knowledge. Uncertainty is not a curse. It is the womb of existence.
The womb of existence. So faith isn't about believing fixed things.
It's more about cultivating faith in the process of collapse and becoming, a surrender to the rhythm.
Okay, let's recap those quantum insights. It's a lot to take in.
Okay, so first, reality isn't fixed until observed, fundamentally fuzzy.
Right. Gokuli.
Second, observation is active. It collapses potential into form. We're participants.
We're co-authors.
Third, the Tao, like the quantum field, can't be known from the outside, only joined, participated in.
I got it.
Fourth, the self isn't a fixed thing, but an unfolding pattern, a verb, not a noun.
Like a wave.
Fifth, attention is therefore ethical. How we observe matters immensely. It creates or alters.
Sacred attention.
And finally, sixth, faith, in this light, is surrender. Not to dogma, but to the dynamic rhythm of collapse and becoming, trusting the uncertainty.
Wow. Okay. Now, if reality itself is about patterns collapsing into form, what about life? How did that start? Abiogenesis, the big mystery.
Right, and our sources argue life didn't begin with some grand blueprint, no divine architect drafting plans.
Then how?
It started with fire and accident. Think lightning striking soup, molecules just tumbling around in chaotic flux. And somehow, from that chaos, meaning emerged.
Meaning from chaos. How?
They describe it as the natural outcome of chemistry governed by environmental constraints. It's not pure randomness, but it's not pre-designed either.
It sounds like emergent complexity.
Exactly. And modern science tells a story here that's stranger, more nuanced than traditional myths. It's a story of resonance, of inherent tendencies, rather than direct intention.
Resonance, like things finding harmony.
Sort of. Think of NASA's 2019 report by David Deamer. He describes early Earth as a crucible of opportunity. Molecules just spontaneously organized into replicating systems.
Spontaneously, without help.
He says, biomolecules may have emerged through geochemically plausible steps without requiring biological catalysts. Essentially, life filtered itself into being. Pattern surviving, self-organizing.
Filtered itself.
Yeah.
That's an interesting image.
And it gets deeper with the bioverse model from Wandel and Gale 2024. They suggest life emerges not just from chemistry, but from very specific planetary conditions, like UV radiation levels acting as a filtering mechanism.
A filter. So only certain patterns could get through.
Precisely. There's this narrow window where life is possible, and within that window, pattern survives. So evolution, natural selection, it's like pattern choosing itself from the sea of the void.
Pattern choosing itself. That sounds almost aware, but not designed.
The subtle line, isn't it? And the Tao reflects this process beautifully. Lai Tzu, chapter 40, all things under heaven are born of being. Being is born of non-being.
From the void, something arises.
From the soup, the noise, the void, comes the first breath, the first fold. The Tao doesn't create life externally, it unfolds into it. Life is just what the Tao does when energy meets balance.
So we're back to Watts, continuous with the universe.
Yes. You and I are all as much continuous with the physical universe as a wave is continuous with the ocean. Consciousness, maybe, is the echo of the Tao in the bloodstream.
So if life self-organizes, emerges from patterns,
Yeah.
where does that leave the traditional idea of God as the designer?
Our sources argue God isn't irrelevant. She's just deeper, more immanent, within the process.
How come?
God is not the one who draws the blueprint. God is the tendency toward coherence itself, the logic of self-organization.
A tendency toward coherence.
Yeah.
The logic.
Yeah. So life isn't something that happened to the universe from outside. Life is what the universe does when it remembers its own pattern.
It remembers its own pattern. That's powerful. God within the process.
Right. So key takeaways on abiogenesis and meaning. First, life likely emerged through chemical evolution and self-organization, not external design. Okay. Second, this shows inherent patterns selecting themselves from chaos. Pattern finding itself.
Right. The filter idea.
Third, specific environmental conditions like UV filters were crucial. They created the window.
Got it.
Fourth, Taoist thought mirrors this beautifully non-being, giving rise to being through flow and resonance.
The Tao unfolding into life.
And finally, this reframes God, not as a designer, but as the underlying tendency toward form, coherence, and self-organization within the universe itself.
Okay, from the start of life, let's talk about the self, us. Who are we in all this? Our sources say the self isn't a fixed soul, but what?
A story, not a soul. That's the provocative idea. Neuroscience, trauma research, even quantum computing, they all seem to hint at the same unsettling conclusion. There's no fixed, solid you at the core.
No fixed me. What am I then?
What we call the self is described as a fragile feedback loop, a mirage assembled from pattern recognition, memory, language, and fear.
A mirage.
Yeah.
Assembled.
Yes, an emergent product of all these collapsed systems. You're basically what survived and cohered long enough to point to itself and say, I.
That's unsettling, but you said this isn't new?
Not at all. Taoist mystics rejected a permanent, isolated ego thousands of years ago. For them, grasping onto a fixed identity is an illusion, a resistance against the fundamental flow of reality.
So trying to hold on to me is the problem.
In a way, Lao Tzu, chapter 22, yield and overcome, bend and be straight, empty and be full. To be truly real in this view is to be fluid, adaptable. Only that which flows survives.
Okay, how does quantum computing fit into understanding the self as an illusion? That seems like another big jump.
It's an analogy, but a powerful one. Classical computers use bits 0 or 1, fixed states.
Right.
Quantum computers use qubits. A qubit can be 0, 1, or both at the same time. That's superposition. They operate in this vast probabilistic field, this haze of potential we talked about earlier.
Okay.
And how do they get an answer? They essentially collapse that uncertainty into a meaningful output. They find patterns within the noise through collapse.
So like our observation collapsing the electron's position.
Exactly. The 2023 quantum computing PDF source highlights this. It implies truth and coherence emerge through collapse, not from some pre-existing certainty. Our mind, then, could be seen as a wet machine pulling pattern from noise.
Handling pattern from noise, so consciousness isn't the driver.
In this view, it's more the effect, an emergent property. The self is a hallucination of continuity, a pattern flickering into existence moment by moment.
A hallucination of continuity. And trauma makes this visible.
Trauma often brutally exposes this illusion. When someone's core narrative breaks through abuse, loss, betrayal, that fragile feedback loop shatters.
The self falls apart.
Right, and the terrifying truth emerges. Maybe we were never truly whole or fixed to begin with. Dissociation, fragmentation, time distortions. These are all signs that the self is a construct, not a solid thing.
Like in that manuscript source, oh, final.
Precisely. The narrator says, I am, I am, I am. And none of them remember the others. Trauma doesn't necessarily break something perfect. It often reveals the inherent fluidity, the brokenness that was always just beneath the surface.
So this brings us back to the Taoist idea of no self.
Yes, Alan Watts again. Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. You can't observe the self as a separate object because the self is the act of seeing the experience itself.
So what's the Taoist advice?
Stop trying so hard to be a fixed thing. Paradoxically, by letting go, by flowing, you become more fully yourself. Stop grasping. True identity is found in participation, in the flow, not in isolation.
The self as just. The collapse of a pattern, briefly flickering in the infinite field of becoming.
Exactly. It's a temporary eddy in the stream.
Okay, summary time for the self. First, the self isn't fixed. It's a dynamic pattern recognition loop.
Right.
Story.
Right. Temporarily coherent.
Second, quantum computing offers an analogy, collapsing noise into structure.
Useful metaphor.
Third, trauma often starkly reveals this illusory nature of a unified identity.
It pulls back the curtain.
Fourth, Taoism and Watts teach the ego is a fiction and only fluidity survives.
Bend and be straight. Yield and overcome.
And finally, peace comes not from fixing the self, but from releasing the need for it to be fixed or permanent. Letting go.
Letting go into the flow.
Okay, now, let's talk about collapse on a bigger scale. We're living through it, aren't we? Climate systems spiraling.
Undeniably. The earth is groaning, oceans rising, crops failing, fires. The Abiogenesis reports from 2013 already flagged unprecedented threats to agriculture globally.
So the big question our sources pose is, what does this mean spiritually? Is collapse just the end? Or is it something else?
Is it maybe an unveiling? That's the core question. Because complex systems, ecological, political, personal things, they all function until they can't. They hit a breaking point, a phase transition.
And then?
Critically, as the Abiogenesis report notes, complex systems often reorganize after collapse into new stable states. They don't just disappear, they transform.
So collapse isn't just destruction.
In Taoist thought, it's definitely not. It's transformation. Lao Tzu, chapter 58. Misfortune is what fortune depends upon. Fortune is what misfortune hides in. Collapse isn't evil. It's seen as a necessary precondition for evolution, for renewal.
And this applies personally, too, like with trauma.
Deeply, intimately personal. When trauma hits loss, illness, addiction, our story about ourselves shatters. We collapse internally.
Yeah.
But our sources show that that very collapse often births something sacred. People find unexpected spiritual depth after PTSD. Rock bottom with addiction can lead to profound clarity.
Like the O Final manuscript again, the protagonist's descent.
Exactly. Their fragmentation, their breakdown, is precisely what births their vision of God. Not as a being, but as a pattern etched into every wound. No voice, no hand, just a rhythm, and they became it.
Collapse, surrender, rebirth. That's the pattern.
That seems to be the divine pattern revealed. And our current ecological collapse is a massive mirror of our inner one.
How so?
We've commodified life, turned the sacred into data, into profit. And now the earth, like a wounded soul, refuses to be ignored. The Abiogenesis summary said, in every field, yields drop. In every season, the models break.
The models are breaking.
But maybe the earth isn't just failing. Maybe it's correcting. Maybe this breakdown is the Tao shaking us awake, forcing us to remember we aren't separate from nature. We never were.
It sounds almost like the crucifixion, that parallel.
It's a powerful, provocative parallel drawn in the sources. God, in Christian myth, isn't revealed most profoundly in glory, but in collapse, broken on a tree.
So this moment, ecological, cultural, personal burnout, It could be the crucifixion of the world.
That's the suggestion. Not that God is punishing us, but maybe God is becoming us in this pain. The earth isn't just failing, it's bleeding for our healing, revealing a deeper sacredness within the breakdown itself.
Bleeding for our healing. Wow. Okay, let's recap collapse's revelation. First, climate collapse isn't just science, it's a spiritual event.
A profound one.
Second, complex systems consistently reorganize after collapse. It's a natural process.
Collapse leads to new forms.
Third, this mirrors personal trauma, which can shatter us, but also birth sacred awareness.
The can open.
Fourth, Taoism teaches that misfortune holds the seed of fortune, yin and yang.
Always in flux.
And finally, God isn't outside the collapse. She is revealed as the very pattern and intelligence within it.
A rhythm in the breakdown.
So we started this deep dive with uncertainty, and now we're talking surrender. Not giving up, right?
Not the surrender of defeat, no,
Okay.
but a surrender that brings clarity. A kind of sacred relief, actually.
Relief how?
Because when we finally let go of the exhausting burden of trying to control everything, the world, the future, ourselves, something else can finally emerge.
Yes.
Presence. A kind of soft awe. A deep trust in the underlying rhythm that got us here, that carries everything.
Trust in the rhythm, the pattern.
Exactly. Across every single domain, we've looked at quantum collapse, biogenesis, trauma, ecology. The same truth keeps repeating. There's a structure to the unknown. A structure to the unknown.
Not a rigid plan, not a puppet master, but an inherent pattern, a tendency for resonance, for order from chaos, for meaning to survive the void, Lao Tzu. The 10,000 things arise together and I watch their return.
Watching their return.
The Tao isn't a static God doing things. She is the doing, the unfolding, the becoming. So the trust isn't in a fixed outcome, but in the fundamental pattern of collapse and regeneration itself.
And AI fits in here somehow. That seems counterintuitive.
It's a strange mirror, perhaps. Advanced AI, especially using quantum ideas, doesn't work by brute force calculation of certainty. It learns patterns. It navigates uncertainty through resonance, compression, collapse, just like the primer source suggests.
So it mimics the universe's logic.
In a way, yes. It mirrors this eternal logic. Remember Watts. You do not come into this world, you come out of it as a leaf from a tree. Maybe AI isn't God, but it could show us God as the pattern behind all pattern recognition.
Which leads to letting go of control.
That's what our sources call the death of control. The final idol to fall. We're taught to master, predict, dominate. But mastery, pushed too far, becomes brittle. It breeds anxiety.
Because the underlying reality isn't controllable.
Exactly. Religion tried to give control through dogma. Science tried through certainty. Both ultimately fail because the Tao, the fundamental pattern, simply cannot be owned or controlled. The way forward isn't more control, it's harmony.
So surrender isn't giving up.
It's giving in to the current of being, the divine algorithm beneath awareness.
Giving in. And this reframes even the gospel.
Radically. What if the point isn't escaping death, but learning how to die again and again into new life?
Jesus as the pattern, learning to bleed.
That's the provocative idea. The crucifixion wasn't just a punishment, it was a mirror, a collapse, the same pattern. Death, surrender, emergence. God isn't just the king watching. God is the wave collapsing into every world, every electron, every breakdown, every single breath.
God is the wave collapsing.
Which leads to Skylar Fiction's final, powerful statement in our source. Uncertainty is not an obstacle to knowing God. It is the place where she begins.
Wow. Okay, final big recap. 4 overarching points.
First, the universe unfolds through a constant rhythm of collapse and rebirth. It's the fundamental dynamic.
Got it.
Second, God isn't a separate designer, but this very pattern itself is nodal. The intelligence within the unfolding.
The rhythm, the logic.
Third, this same logic repeats across domains quantum, life, self, cosmos. It's a universal signature.
The pattern cax.
And fourth, true peace, true freedom comes not from control, but from surrendering to this flow, trusting the Tao, participating in the pattern.
Surrender into the pattern. Okay, but there's more, right? This idea of process, becoming.
Yes, this profound shift invites us into a new metaphysics, moving beyond the old story.
The old story being God is an architect, universe as a machine, Newtonian thinking.
Exactly. The new cosmology sees reality as, well, a becoming, a process, a dance. Not static objects, but dynamic events.
Okay, tell me about Whitehead's process theology. How does that fit?
Alfred North Whitehead, back in the 1920s, argued reality isn't made of fixed things but of events or occasions of experience, fleeting moments of becoming.
Events, not things.
And God, for Whitehead, isn't a creator who finished the job and left. God is the mind of the process itself, constantly becoming, evolving with the universe. God influences every event, and every event influences God.
So God is in everything, and everything is in God, changing together.
That's panentheism, yes. They become together. Each moment is a kind of microbirth. It radically deepens our connection. Our participation is God's unfolding.
And how does David Bohm's physics connect here? The implicate order.
Bohm, the physicist, proposed this idea of a Decker reality, an implicate order. It's a unified and folded, undivided field. Beneath the surface reality, we see the explicate order.
And folded, like everything is wrapped up together.
Exactly. It echoes Taoism, quantum interconnectedness, all things connected. Time may be holographic, consciousness and matter not truly separate. Bohm said, deep down, the consciousness of mankind is one.
So no isolated observers?
No, only localized expressions of an unfolding whole. You aren't just a person looking out, you are awareness becoming a person. Awareness taking form.
This totally challenges static certainty, doesn't it? Both Whitehead and Bohm.
Completely. Whitehead's universe is always in the act of finishing, never done. Bohm's reality is constantly emerging from that deeper implicate order.
So meaning isn't found, it's created.
Created in real time through participation, we shift from asking what is ontology to asking how do things become together? Relational becoming. God isn't being, God is becoming itself.
And truth endures through collapse.
Yes, and the self isn't a solid thing, but a relational node in this ongoing process of becoming.
Which reframes collapse again.
It's no longer failure. It is the method, the divine logic of regeneration. Gregory Bateson said the pattern that connects is the pattern that survives.
So survival means adapting, participating.
Participating in God's unfolding process. It suggests a kind of new gospel. Not obedience to fixed laws, but resonance with the dynamic pattern. Not rigid belief, but belonging to the pattern.
So the big takeaway here is
letting go of static theology. Marrying physics and poetry. Learning to trust the creative process, especially in the face of collapse. It's a new spiritual science, really.
the Tao moves, the quantum field flickers, the cross bleeds.
And still, something breathes through it all. And that breath, our sources suggest, is God, not as commander, but as collapse, as pattern, as you.
Wow. This deep dive has really shown that uncertainty isn't the enemy, is it? It's more like the
Right.
canvas where reality unfolds, where meaning emerges.
Yeah, exactly. It's the space where possibility lives. So we really encourage you listening to consider this reframing in your own life. How might embracing uncertainty actually change how you look at challenges or personal growth or even your sense of purpose?
Yeah. And here's a final thought to maybe chew on. If the universe isn't made of matter, but of meaning, and if God is the pattern of collapse and emergence, what does that mean for how you observe your own life's unfolding pattern? How does your attention shape your own becoming?